said this at the Mercury Cafe the other evening. I had been speaking for some time with Andrea, and she had been talking about the Green Party. And up until that point, I had really thought of Green Party as, basically hippies, white hippies, granola, yogurt, yoga parks, all of that. And so while that was all well and good, I didn't see myself inside of it. I didn't see what role that I would have inside of that, and what role I would play, or a person of color would play inside of the party. Although the platform was awesome. So I saw that Mr. Baraka came on, and I had been following him for quite some time inside of the Black Agenda report and his writings. So when I saw that he had moved into the Green Party, I was extremely excited. It was what pushed me over and finally allowed me to say, okay, if Baraka is inside of it, and this is basically who I want to be when I grow up, that then there must be something to this. It's something that I can do. And I called Andrea, we talked. We've been in a series of conversations since that point about the Green Party. And so I'm very excited to introduce the Green Party in general to the community, but I'm also very excited to introduce Mr. Baraka himself to the community, because I think he's such a dynamic figure that comes from such a unique perspective, and his voice is so unique that I know that you will find him as enlightening as I have found him. So I've given you a lot to live up to, but we're going to get to that in just a second. I want to explain a little bit about the format. So basically what I'm going to do is allow Mr. Baraka to introduce himself and to take a few minutes to open up what it is that he would like to say. I have been asking online questions that from you, and I see some of you are here, so you might want to ask those questions yourself, but if not, I can ask them, that you would like to pose to Mr. Baraka. And then I will take it live from the audience, any of you that are actually here, that if you want to ask questions and basically get it. I really want this to be a dialogue. I want it to be a conversation, and not so much CNN-ish, as I'm sure they're used to these days, and more community town hall-ish, if that makes any sense, if those words are applicable. So first and foremost, I would like to get the formal introduction. I had all of them on my telephone that was dying of use, but it made it. So this is the formal introduction of Mr. Ajamu Baraka. He's a human rights defender who has experienced spans 4 decades of domestic and international education and activism. Ajamu Baraka is a veteran grassroots organizer, roots in the Black liberation movement and anti-apartheid and Central American solidarity struggle. Baraka is an internationally recognized leader of emerging human rights movement in the United States and has been at the forefront of efforts to apply the international human rights framework to social justice advocacy in the United States for more than 25 years. Ajamu Baraka was the founding executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network from July 2004 until June 2011. This was the first domestic human rights formation in the United States explicitly committed to the application of international human rights standards to the U.S. Under Baraka, the network grew from a core membership of 60 organizations to more than 300 U.S.-based member organizations and 1,500 individual members who work on the full spectrum of human rights. He is currently an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda report, and a writer for Counterpunch, and of course, the Green Party's pick for vice president. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ajamu Baraka.
It's my pleasure to be with all of you this evening. I really I'm looking forward to this conversation, because that is in fact what I'm trying to do during the course of this campaign. It's really important to me to beyond the big rally kinds of events where we're trying to mobilize large numbers of people to join the Green Party adventure. It's important, though, to have these kinds of conversations where we can really get to know each other, can really hopefully delve into the very complex and serious issues that we face here in this country, and that we face in trying to build a new and progressive social movement here in this country, utilizing the electoral process as a central instrument in that process of building popular power. So, I'm glad that we're going to have a chance to, in fact, talk this evening. So briefly, just as many of you are just getting to know me, I am basically just an individual who has committed myself to the task of trying to make this a better world. Not just for myself, of course, but for my children, my grandchildren, my community. Um, and I committed to that at quite a young age because of my own particular experiences. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, being subjected to the real social, political, and economic contradictions of growing up black and poor um, in this country, and believing that people should not have to be subjected to those kinds of conditions. And being an avid reader and developing a pretty decent understanding of history, I discovered that that was in fact um, a fact. That is that we don't have to have societies in which people live the way that many of us were forced to live. That there is the possibility of living a life in which we can fully develop our human capacities. That we don't have to have an economic system that's based on the exploitation and the degradation of human beings. That we don't have to have a system in which some people are recognized as having more value than other people. And so that understanding and that commitment that we can be more than what we are today has been the motivation for the work that I've been involved in for most of my life. It was the motivation that brought me to the human rights framework and for me to embrace the concept of fundamental human rights, that everybody has a right to live a dignified life. So my story is a very simple one. It's a one that is reflective of a alternative ethical framework and a vision that we can transform ourselves and we can transform our conditions.
So I wanted to really set the framework for the first part of this discussion and some of the questions that are going to be coming forward as far as that's concerned. I know many of us who are familiar with your work inside of the human rights movement, also your work inside of Africa, were a bit surprised, not shocked, I just say surprised, about you coming into the Green Party. Not that it was new to you, but that you came in as the vice president running mate. Can you talk a little bit about what was the process that brought you to make that declaration, for you to come in at such a high level? What convinced you?
Well, I mean, what convinced me was Dr. Stein and the historical moment. I always believed in and participated in the progressive electoral work in the U.S. I always believed that the progressive movement and radicals in particular never took full advantage of the possibilities that existed in engaging in the electoral process. And that was partially the consequence of people believing that the only way in which we engage in radical politics is to be involved in activities that uh, mirrored just sort of mobilization politics, that any kind of interaction with the state meant that you were compromising your principles. So the kind of of serious study that we needed to engage in to look at how we could relate to the electoral process, to see what kind of democratic spaces we could win for ourselves, to address the material needs of the people we were attempting to try to organize. We didn't really take full advantage of. So I've always felt that there was those kinds of possibilities, and for many years, we didn't get a chance to really talk about that. But because of what has happened over the last decade or so, um, we see now that many progressives, many radicals in this country are taking a second look at this arena, and I knew that with the uh, uh, universal disgust that people felt for the two main elite parties, that there was in 2016 a real possibility for a third party breakthrough. So when Dr. Stein, who I've been supporting for quite some time, I was a member of the Green Shadow cabinet, and supported her run in 2012 when she asked me to consider joining her on this ticket. I gave it some thought. I wanted her to be aware of the fact that my life has been a life in which I call things as I see them. I speak truth to power because I believe I have that responsibility because many of the oppressed don't have a chance to have a voice, and so I felt a principled commitment to do that. And I said, be prepared because I have not been a professional politician, but if you are in support of me and I believe in you, then I said, let's do it. Let's try to make some history together. And I joined the ticket.
So in that same vein, you joining the ticket has not come without its share of controversy. The least of which, I think the one that's gathered, and I'd love to tackle this in the beginning so we can move on to other topics that are not shock topics that CNN or Fox News or any of those corporate media would spend excessive amount of time on. But your comment regarding and I spent some time on Saturday or Sunday when Dr. Stein was here addressing this to the audience that was here. But I thought it was great that we have this opportunity for you to express what to put into context the sentiments that you expressed around Barack Obama and his capitulation to the system that you eloquently in the Green Party talked about essentially.
You mean my characterization of Barack Obama?
Yes, that one.
It's really interesting because as you know, we have sort of internal conversations, and that was a interview that took place. It was right after I think the shooting at Mother Emanuel's in South Carolina, and I was referring to what I thought was a serious, not just error, but a serious crime that was committed by the Obama administration when they capitulated to the Republican right wing and pulled a very important report that was finished in 2010 by the Department of Homeland Security that identified the #1 terrorist threat in the United States of America. And what that report concluded was that the #1 terrorist threat in the U.S. it wasn't from Al Qaeda, it wasn't from a Muslim fundamentalist, but the #1 domestic terrorist threat stemmed from the domestic white nationalist movement, in particular the so-called lone wolves. Well, when that report came out, the Republicans, for whatever strange reasons, said that this was a partisan report. apparently they felt that this was a report that was unfairly targeting them. I guess maybe they identify with that kind of constituency. I don't know. But as a consequence of the pressure that was put on the administration, what did the Obama administration do? They pulled their report. Now, my concern is this: if that report would have been disseminated to the American people, if the worshipers that night at Mother Emanuel would have been aware of the fact that a white, young, lone wolf, white nationalist was a potential threat to the community, I'm sure they would still open up their arms and allow that individual to come into their midst to worship. But maybe they would have been a little bit more on guard. Maybe they would have, when it was time to pray, maybe they would have kept one eye open and watched him, you know. But that didn't happen because no one knew about that report. So, that was something that really enraged me and really was reflective of the kind of politics that we saw coming from this administration, that something as important as notifying, of alerting the community to these potential threats was sacrificed at the altar of political pragmatism and not being concerned about ruffling the feathers of the political right. So that was what I was referring to when I referred to our dear brother as basically an Uncle Tom, because that incident, along with the political cover he gave to the other racist states that boycotted the World Conference Against Racism, the 10th commemoration of that. I thought that was basically another unprincipled position. I was part of that process of trying to facilitate the U.S. government's participation in the 10th anniversary, the 10th commemoration of that very historic conference on race. And to I guess my better judgment, I helped to try to get the UN to concede all of the points that were being raised by the administration to allow for them to participate in this conference. And we got all of them. And yet the administration still decided to boycott, and that gave cover to all of the other countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Brits, to basically boycott the election. So, these are just a few examples that suggested to me that, we could not, we can't be dishonest. When we see that with all of this rash of killings across this country by police officers, and we see that the Department of Justice under the Obama administration can only see fit to indict one of these killer cops. There's something there that suggests to us, to me, that this administration still has not, still is more concerned with sort of kowtowing to white power than having an administration that is committed to upholding principles and protecting human rights. So that was my characterization, that basically beyond the symbolism of this individual in that office, that when it came to African Americans and other poor people and working class people in this country, that his administration has, in fact, in my opinion, objectively been a disaster.
Thank you. I wanted to begin to move into the section where, oh wow, okay, we've had quite a few more people join us. Where these are some of the questions that were posed through for people around the country, and I would like just to get your comments on those questions as we move forward. It was recently reported that the leaked Democratic documents revealed that the Democratic Party actively stonewalls the Black community, with one part of the document saying, and I quote, "Don't offer support for a concrete policy position." What are your thoughts on that leak coming out of the Democratic Party and its implications for African American, Black people, people of color overall?
Well, I think it's consistent with the practice of the Democratic Party over the last few decades, there has been a conclusion that they no longer have to earn the votes of the Black community, that the Black community has nowhere else to go but to participate in the Democratic Party process, and that as a consequence, you have that kind of attitude is pure and utter contempt. And so that is one of the reasons why we believe that there are a number of people who are considering if they see real momentum and see a real possibility of an alternative, that there are a number of Black people, and the Black people are in fact coming to the Green Party who believe that it is in their not just their objective interest, but that it is a reflection of their belief in their own inherent dignity that they have to break away from the Democratic Party. So, you know, this is reflective of the contempt, and the contempt that I believe also was reflected under the administration of Barack Obama. That basically all of the opportunities that the administration had to address the grinding poverty in Black communities and Latino communities, uh, policies that could have been addressed even through executive orders, they were not pursued because of the potential consequence or political consequence of, in fact, doing that. That, you know, they can do that and get away with it because there were still so many people who were enamored with the idea of this Black man being in the White House. And our argument then, as today, is that we can no longer allow ourselves to be taken in by symbols and symbolism. That we have to have an approach to politics and power in this country in which we are able to identify our interests and we're prepared to struggle for those interests, because our interests are also bound up with the interests of other working class and poor people in this country, and that we have to be serious about that and go beyond the symbols and the personalities and engage in real power politics. And, you know, if there are members of the Black community, what we call the Black Agenda Report, the Black misleadership class, if they need to be called out, then they should be called out. That is a objective, principled position. So that is what you read is reflective of the contempt that the Democratic Party has, not just to Black people, but as we see the realignment taking place in the Democratic Party, and the way they treated the Sanders movement is the contempt they have for the progressive movement in this country in general, because they believe that we have no other choice. But we're here to say in 2016, you do have a choice. It's called the Green Party.
All right. This next question comes from Ms. Jasasud out of Stone Mountain, Georgia. She says Black men represent 14% of the U.S. general population and 40% of the prison population. The United States has the highest imprisonment rate in the world, and the Corrections Corporation privately owns prisons and places their corporations in the stock market, with shares having jumped from $8 to $30 plus a share. With that having been said, my question is, for the Green Party, is what are their plans to address this horrific problem of mass incarceration of Black people?
That is a very good question. It's reflective of one of the main challenges that we have here in this country to reverse this process of mass incarceration, targeting Black folks, Latinos, and poor people in general. It's important to point out that one of the fastest growing prison populations in this country today are in fact Black women, women of color, whose rates of incarceration even outstrip that of Black men. So one of the things we are going to do is to eliminate this bogus, this phony war on drugs. We need to decriminalize the drug laws here in this country. We need to allow for folks who have been convicted of nonviolent drug offenses to be released to go into various kinds of community-based programs. We need to begin to treat the epidemic of drug addiction as the public health problem that it is, as opposed to incarcerating people. We need to have a judicial system in which the first objective is not punishment, but to go back to what used to be a liberal principle in this country, and that is that there is the possibility of rehabilitation. And so we need to move away from a punishment society to one in which there is restorative justice, because we know there are some people that engage in certain kinds of criminal activities. But we need to have community-based processes in which the community can determine how you deal with those kinds of issues. So, we have to address that issue. But part of addressing that issue of mass incarceration is also addressing issues of culture, issues of ethics, of us, of morality, of talking about the kinds of values that we want to hold as principal values in this society. Because we're not going to be able to shift policies until we are able to shift people's consciousness. So part of what we have to engage in this country as we build movement for radical change is to have conversations and to talk about how we see ourselves as a people, to talk about what kind of value systems we want to have reflected in our public policies, and then begin to construct public policies and social institutions that reflect a commitment to a higher set of values and practices. So, that's how we deal with the issue of mass incarceration. We transform society.
Thank you. The next question comes from Zaid from Seattle, Washington. Why did you accept the role of vice president as opposed to the president's role, or running for president itself?
Well, I'm not a traditional.
Sorry. Let me give a little context, more context to that question. A lot of people had accused Bernie Sanders of sheepdogging for the Democratic Party, bringing people who had basically been disenfranchised with the Democratic Party, bringing them back into the fold, leading them into Hillary's camp ultimately. The question I think is being posed in that vein: could you be seen as sheepdogging for radicals and progressives who are disenfranchised with the Democratic Party into the Green Party that many say is a huge long shot as far as having any possibility as far as making any leeway into these elections?
Mm-hmm. Interesting question and context. If I am sheepdogging to build a radical alternative to the Democrat and Republican parties, then I accept that. But basically, we have to build an alternative. We have to build alternative political power, independent political power. And so I'm telling all folks who believe in that possibility of the people being able to govern themselves, who reject the two-party monopoly that is in service of the 1%, that basically we have an alternative. It's called the Green Party, and that the Green Party is not a perfect party. The Green Party needs to engage, and we will engage in internal struggle. But the Green Party is in fact a reality, and that if you believe in alternative politics, if you're going to participate in the electoral process, then we say you have a home in this party. And we say, join us in this party to transform this party and to build real popular power. So if I'm sheepdogging for that, that's in fact my role. I want the sheepdog for the Green Party. But I also want to tell people that this is not just about an election. The election is important. Voting for us is important. We want to get to a certain threshold so we can be more competitive. But you know what? People say, oh, you can't win. And I say, you've already won. We can't lose. Every time we have an opportunity to have these kinds of conversations, every time another person like yourself believes that they have a home in the Green Party, and that they are committed to third-party politics. How do we lose? We're talking about building movement here in this country. So basically, any opportunity we have access to the people, where we can talk about our positions, where we can show people that some of us are not afraid and that we're ready to struggle. We're not afraid what's on the other side, what's around the corner. Then we can't lose in terms of that kind of mission. So, whether or not we end up in the White House and taking an oath in January, we're still going to be a winner because we understand the trajectory of history, and we understand that. And I'm not being mystical. I think we understand that the kind of contradictions in this society are such where basically power has to begin to shift back to the people, and we have to have the instruments among ourselves to be able to galvanize that power in order for us to change our conditions. So the Green Party and other parties are the wave of the future. So if I'm sheepdoggy for that, then like I said, I will continue until November the 8th and beyond.
Thank you. I have just two more questions from that came online, and then I would like to hear from people who are actually in attendance here who may have questions for you. This question actually comes from someone who is actually here, Helen Littlejohn. She wants to know, and in the larger context, how will the Green Party address the country's water crisis up against the likes of big oil?
Big oil?
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting question also. We have a situation now where we have a big business that believes it has the right to commodify everything in nature, including something as important as water. I believe personally that that is not right, and that we have to have measures to prevent companies from owning and controlling something as precious as our water. We know that with our existing water sources, that those water sources are under tremendous pressure from oil and gas production. This Stein-Baraka administration would immediately attempt to pass legislation that would eliminate fracking, that would contain and stop the expansion of oil production. Because of our commitment to transforming the economy into a green economy, we believe that we can move away from our dependence on fossil fuels. So we would attempt in our administration to begin to move toward policies to make that vision a reality. We believe that it can be done, that we can have an economy that's completely grounded in clean energy by 2030. So precious commodities that are essential for human life, like water, they have to be up under the control of the public. So my commitment to private ownership of these kinds of commodities is not there. Those kinds of commodities, like others, have to be up under the control of the people.
Thank you. The last question. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got to get there. Didn't do that. The last question from my mind comes from Baca from Denver, Colorado. And he wants to know, will you honor the treaties? What will be done about poverty on the reservations? What will be done about the cost of food on the reservation, housing, the heating crisis on the reservation? The elders are dying because they can't afford their propane. What is the Green Party's plans for that?
Well, I'm going to tell you the specifics, of that, are things that we have to work out. But I can talk about the general principle that we would pursue, and that is that for many of us, and I talk personally, we believe in authentic decolonization here in this country. We believe that what is missing here in this country is the fact that indigenous people don't have the ability to fully exercise self-determination. we would immediately withdraw those oppressive um, federal institutions that don't allow for indigenous people to rule themselves. We would make sure that the existing treaties between the sovereign nations and the U.S. Is respected, and we would enter into conversations with indigenous people in terms of how we begin to address the hundreds of treaties that have been violated, how we begin to address those issues um, and to have a reconciliation or a solution to how we bring about real justice for the owners of this land here in this place we call the United States of America. So the issue of real decolonization. And this is a very difficult one because when we talk about real decolonization, we're not talking about, it's not just a metaphor. It's talking about how we have real social justice and self-determination for indigenous people. And that has to be bound up with the demands of also of other people who need and who desire for self-determination. So that is part of a program based on principle. We would make sure that whatever resources that we could galvanize to address the material needs um, um, in the territories in Indian land, we would make sure they were available based on a plan that indigenous people work out for themselves.
Thank you. Are these microphones for questions? Okay. Okay. So, if there are any questions, I'm going to pose it over to the audience at this point. For those of you who have questions, I'm thinking if you could raise your hand and I'll call on you, and if you can stand up and pose your question forward. So we'll go here, 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 and here to start with. Go ahead.
Hi. You just talked about the rights of indigenous people and self-determination. What about the Palestinians? What would you do for the Palestinians?
For the Palestinians?
Yes, that was the question.
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt about our positions on that. That basically, we believe in self-determination of all peoples, and specifically when you in Palestine, that basically it is unsustainable for the occupation of Palestine to continue. Simple as that. And so, those of us who believe in self-determination, who believe in the equal value of all life, who believe that people have a right to live as human beings, then we have a responsibility to engage in practices and to support policies that allow for that to happen. So we would throw the full weight of the state to finally come up with a just solution to the plight of Palestinians in that part of the world. I've been to Palestine, I've been to Israel proper, and I've been to the occupied territories. And I can tell you that any rational and moral person who moves through the West Bank and who sees the consequence of occupation, who sees the daily humiliations that Palestinian people are subjected to, who will go through the checkpoints like I went through, who can spend time in the old city of Jerusalem and see what people are subjected to. I would say that no one would then conclude that Palestinians don't have a right to self-determination, and that it would be very difficult for anybody to give complete support to the policies that we see emanating from the Israeli state today. And that's part of the reason why, many people in the U.S. have such a distorted understanding of the situation in Israel and Palestine, because the reality of that occupation has been obscured for most of the American people. But there's a reason why people like Desmond Tutu who concluded that what he saw in Palestine was worse than apartheid in South Africa. There's a real reason for that.
Thank you. Rashawn?
Hi, Mr. Baraka. My name is Rashawn Bliss. I work for the Republican Justice Project. Thanks for addressing us. So my question is about if everybody is elected and wins the White House, what can be done about the epidemic of police violence in this country? The executive branch is inhabited by a black man who is part of the demographic so routinely targeted by our law enforcement in this country, yet we've seen so little action on the national level. And indeed, that's part of the problem, is that the many police officers are really actually based and controlled in the local level. So I know that there are limitations to what a president can do, but and much less a vice president. But what do you see as the way forward for our country in addressing the problem of racist police violence, unaccountable police who are never actually brought to justice for the crimes they commit against our people? What would you do? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. One thing that we would definitely reverse is what appears to have developed here in this country, and that is the sense that there is immunity from the federal government for those police officials who arbitrarily take the lives of other U.S. citizens. We think it is a major contradiction that of all of the killer cops that have been that we've even witnessed with our own eyes, that the Obama administration has only saw fit to prosecute one. So there's a sense of impunity, I think, among some of these police forces. So we know that there is a culture in this country among the police. We know that there is an attitude that the police are involved in policing these dangerous and violent communities. And we know that those attitudes have to be addressed. We know that there is this culture of militarism that has resulted in police forces now behaving and looking like occupation armies. We know that the mission of the police forces in this country have shifted and become even more aggressive because the populations that they have been tasked with having to control and contain are populations that many have concluded are populations made up of people who are now problem people, people who are basically superfluous, who are redundant vis-a-vis the society and the economy, people whose bodies are more valuable incarcerated than participating in the private economy. So, the combination of these objective structural realities and the attitudes of police forces across this country has created a toxic mix in which the result has been this rash of shootings and beatings across the country that are now being captured on video. So, we have to shift the mission of policing in this country. We have to ensure that we have the ability of communities to be able to police themselves. That we need to go beyond just so-called community policing and civilian oversight committees. We have to have situations where the communities determine for themselves who would be part of their police forces if they, in fact, determine that they should have a so-called police force. So we have to have a radical revisiting of the entire policing process in this country. Now we know that's not going to come overnight, but this ideal that we have these dangerous populations in which the only way that they are contained is through aggressive violence is a dangerous attitude that we have to reversed. But we also have to deal with the fact, the reality that we have this systemic issue, this mission given to the police to basically control and contain populations that most people don't really care about.
Thank you. Yes, here and back there.
Thank you for showing up here, Mr. Baraka. My question has to do
Please.
Okay. All right, so my question has to do with government secrecy and how you're going to crack into it. And one of my main concerns is that I've asked thousands of people because I know about this, is something about the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. At the very moment, there are 6,000 civilian inventions that are kept under wraps. A civilian walked into the patent office, and the government took the best technology for themselves. Including that, if you do some research, you'll find some very, very new technology that does not cover solar, wind. It's science that would obsolete oil. And I guess my question is, how would you crack into something like that? This secret to even the President of the United States. And then how would you feel about if one of these and the green technologies come about and the government doesn't want it, the taxes that they would lose? Oil companies do, but the government loses. If everybody's car ran on a free energy device, then there would be no taxes. So it's the secrecy and then the taxes. I think those are pretty two tough questions, and I don't hear.
Okay, now I might need for someone to sort of recap that for me. I could barely catch that question. Can you recap the
Okay, I'll recap it for you. There's government secrecy on everything, including free energy devices. Okay. Don't talk. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. To recap shortly, the government has a secrecy program on inventions. It's called the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. And currently there are 6,000 inventions that are under this act where a civilian walked into the invention office of something they've been working on their entire lives. And the government can say, hey, we want that for ourselves. Well, some of these inventions, if you do the research, are free energy inventions that are solid state electronic type things that would give free energy. So the question is two-part. One, how would you crack into this type of thing when they keep it secret from even presidents, supposedly? And then two is the reason the government doesn't want free energy devices, along with the oil companies and the banks, is that they would lose taxes. They would lose a lot of taxes. So the two-part question is addressing the secrecy, and the second part is addressing, you know, once stuff happens, even solar cells everywhere, the government loses taxes.
Wow, that is a very interesting question, and is one that I really have not had an opportunity to really think about. The implications, though, in your question are quite disturbing. That the government would, in fact, take inventions, creations for itself without providing any kind of compensation. And the issue of secrecy. I'm as familiar with that part of the secrecy of the state, but we all know that there are secrets in the deep state that, as you said, even presidents are not aware of. So I don't really know how to address that specifically. It's something that we probably need more study of. I think it is an issue that maybe requires more conversation and more information on. But right now, there's not much that I could respond to that specifically.
Okay, well, no one has ever heard of that Invention Secrecy Act. If anyone in this room, speak up, because the media will not report on anything like that. And citizens should know that a lot of technology, 6,000 inventions, is very much. It would take 20 years to release them, one day at a time. That's an incredible amount of stuff that is being held from the citizens.
Thank you.
My question is about the group known as ALEC, the Independent Legislative Exchange Commission. Could you speak about it and talk about the influences it has upon the political process?
Were you able to hear that question?
No, the further back, the more muffled it is.
Right. His question is specifically about ALEC, the American Legislation Group Exchange Council, and its influence on American politics, and specifically, what is the Green Party's position on that? And basically, what is the Green Party's position on that?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if there's an official position of the party on that, but I think that common sense and objective principle in terms of being committed to open governmental process and functioning democracies suggests that disproportionate influence by any of these powerful lobbying groups has a distorting impact on democracy. And we have seen that with this particular group across the country, that the result has been a disproportionate influence over the American people, the blocking of important information so that people can really understand what is going on in places like with the occupation in Palestine, and the ability to basically influence state legislatures, an area of political struggle that liberals and progressives have almost capitulated to the Republicans and the Democrats for quite some time. So the ability of Alex to basically fashion legislation that is then mimicked, duplicated across the country, so that they have created a situation now where they're able to influence public policy, not only on the national level, but specifically on the state level, that has been a foundation for the consolidation of right-wing and anti-progressive policies and programs across the country. So, this is the reflection, though, of the influence of money in politics, the ability to be able to have your agenda adopted because you have the ability to engage in quote unquote free speech, and free speech being measured by the amount of money that you have. And that's why we have to figure out how to take the money out of this so-called democracy. That's why it's so important to reverse decisions like Citizens United. But we also have to reverse the McClutchin decision. We have to bring about a situation where we can have real democratic participation, where money won't rule. And that's the only way we're going to be able to curtail the influence of these kinds of powerful lobbying interests.
Thank you. Mr. Ajamu Baraka, we're going to take a couple more questions, and then I know that you're busy on the campaign trail. We really appreciate you taking this time out to hang out with us with the Greens in Denver, Colorado. Here. Oh, okay. Quite a few more questions. How much more time do you have? Because we have some very curious people here in Denver, Colorado.
I think I could do at least another 15 minutes.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll go through. I'll ask people to keep their questions very succinct so that we can get as many of them as possible. We'll go here, go across.
Hi, my name's Kareen Adams, and so basically my question is based around education, but not so much dealing with student loans in college, but before that. And having gone through the entire American education system, I can say that I feel slightly bamboozled of my history in learning about what made this country who it is today. And so I know that, and this is conversations that I've had with peers also, of changing the American education system where it's not so dated and we're not learning information that picks and chooses what's true and what not. It doesn't tell everybody's history or may not be identifiable to me. I'm not learning about only colonists, but I actually learn African history, not just like British history. So basically my question is, how do you suggest, or what kind of changes do you think should be made or can be made to the American education system?
What kind of adjustments do we need to make to mass education in the U.S.?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good question. I think that one of the things we have to do is to return the power over the curriculum back to the communities. That there's been too much centralization of curriculums, and in the centralization and the attempt to try to universalize education, the perspectives, the experiences, the voices of people who are not part of the majority have ended up being marginalized. The knowledges that people have created are not part of the discourse. So, even our understanding of what the U.S. is distorted by a dominant narrative that's reflected throughout the educational curriculum. Even our approaches to how we look at and study science and social sciences are infected with distorting and inaccurate views of who we are as human beings and what our respective contributions have been. So we have to, I think, revamp the entire educational process in the U.S. because we have an educational process in the U.S. now is geared toward making us more willing receptacles for participating in a economic system and a society in which, while there's lip service given to individualism, we are basically required to surrender our individualism and our freedom in order to just survive.
Right.
That basically we're not being really taught critical skills. We're being taught to conform, to accommodate, to deal with oppressive reality as though these realities are in fact normal and that they can't be altered. So your education really has to be education for liberation, and that requires that the people retake the educational process. It means that we have to have real equality in funding. We have to have standards that are set by the communities. We have to have education that's reflective of the needs of the communities across the country. So, part of the re-envisioning of this society, the radical restructuring of this society, means that a central component of that process is to re-envision, reconstruct what we mean by education. Education has to be something that is geared toward the construction of healthy individuals and healthy communities. And right now, that's not the case. We have education now that basically is resulting in the alienation of people. And that's why we have so many young people who find themselves disconnected and not in any way enthused and motivated to participate in what we call education here in the U.S. Now they will continue because they've been told that if you get your degree or whatever, if you go to higher education, then you're able to then partake of the American dream. But not even that we see is no longer a reality. So part of the radical restructuring of the society also requires the radical restructuring of this education process in the U.S. Thank you.
Here.
So we have the huge problem of climate change. Sure, the Green Party addresses it more seriously than any other party. However, can we really separate that one from the question of human overpopulation, which makes the situation even worse? And where does the Green Party stand in that regard?
Okay, I only get part of that.
Yes, I'm gonna try to paraphrase what she's asking. She's okay. Well, no, actually, she's probably gonna have to do that.
Well, the impact of overpopulation on the environment and where the Green Party stands on that.
Well, I don't believe that the Green Party, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I suspect that the issue with the Green Party is not so-called overpopulation, but the unequal production and distribution of the Earth's resources. That the issue of population is something that we need to look at. But what's the burning issue for the planet is the disproportionate, the unsustainable consumption of the Earth's resources by a small number of people. It's clear, and we all know this for a fact, that the Earth can sustain the population as it presently exists. The problem we have is that we have situations like in North America and in Western Europe, where we make up 10% of the Earth's population. What are we consuming now in terms of the Earth's resources? What, 35%? That's unsustainable. So that kind of inequality is what we have to really focus in on. We have a lot of global problems, and the issues of how the Earth will sustain a rapidly growing population is one of them. But one thing we do know is that we're not going to be able to address that issue of people living longer and the population growing while we have a global economic system that perpetuates the inequality that we see that exists today. That has to be addressed because it is unsustainable. We cannot exist as a human species any longer like that. That's why many of us argue that the contradictions of global capitalism are such where the contradiction is no longer between capital and labor, but the primary contradiction is between capital and all of humanity. So we have some serious questions to ask ourselves whether or not we can survive with the continuation of the hegemony of global capitalism. That's a serious question that we have to address.
So ever since the age of 18, I've always felt powerless and fearful, no matter if I voted or didn't vote. So prior to tonight, I was just going to vote Democrat so Trump didn't get it. Now, if I give my vote to you, am I extending a chance for Trump to win? And also, if you get into the White House, how is your platform going to survive surrounded by Republicans and Democrats?
The first thing we'll say is that our platform will survive and the movement that we are developing because of people like you and everybody else in that room. That what we are building, we are in fact committed to building popular power. And so I say that not to be flippant, but I say that to say that, while Trump does represent some very dark forces in the U.S., people have to remember that even a Trump presidency does not mean that we have a new dictatorship. We have the people. We have the people. And the people resist and have always resisted oppression. And so I'm not afraid of a Donald Trump. I'm more concerned yes, I'm more concerned with, in some ways, I'm more concerned with a continuation of the hegemony of the Democrat Party. Because the Democrat Party is also moving to the right, but with no opposition. So, as dangerous as it might be with a Trump, at least we know that people are going to fight. But what we say today is, let's not worry about Trump. Let's not worry about Hillary Clinton. Let's build a real alternative. Let's step out there and build some real popular power. We have to understand that even beyond Trump, the kind of fear mongering that the Democrats have been effective in galvanizing is going to continue because they do it every 4 years. And you look at who's in the queue on the Republican side coming up. We got some folks who are more dangerous than Donald Trump. Let's be clear. The ruling class is not concerned about Donald Trump because because of his crude racism and xenophobia. They don't care about that. We all know that the Republicans have been flirting with and using race and xenophobia as part of their mobilization processes for decades. The reason that they have turned against Donald Trump is that they're concerned about the fact in some ways he is uncontrollable. And when he talks about things like, redefining NATO or questioning the mission of NATO, when he says he's going to undermine the rules of the WTO by imposing these tariffs and all of this, when he rejects the global capitalist agenda with the so-called free trade agreements, he is posing a real threat to that 1% that's really running things. And that's why they turned against Donald Trump. They don't care about his racism. So, we've got to understand what's really in play here. Those elements who are concerned about this, about the hegemony of the U.S., are concerned